Have you ever imagined a night where the moon simply disappears? Not hidden behind clouds, not darkened by an eclipse just gone. The oceans would tremble, tides confused, animals lost without the silver pulse that guided them for millennia. The darkness would feel heavier, older, almost alive. And you might wonder, what have we done? This is not a legend or a poem. It is a plan once drawn, stamped, and almost carried out by men who believed power could conquer wonder. Its name was Project A119, and its purpose was to detonate a nuclear bomb on the surface of the moon. The year was 1958. The world no longer breathed easy. The Cold War had turned the air itself into a weapon. Each sunrise began with fear, and each night ended with suspicion. The United States and the Soviet Union no longer competed for land or sea, they competed for the heavens. In the desert of New Mexico, where the sand met the sky, scientists worked behind walls of steel and silence. Fluorescent lamps hummed endlessly above tired faces. Equations covered chalkboards, cigarette smoke traced the outlines of dreams too dangerous to name. They were not searching for peace. They were searching for dominance. Only a year earlier, in 1957, the world had witnessed a small sphere rise beyond imagination. It was called Sputnik, barely the size of a beach ball, yet it carried the weight of an empire's pride. Its faint electronic beeping echoed across the night, a simple sound, but one that reached every ear on Earth. It said, "The Soviets got there first." That tiny signal pierced through boardrooms and bedrooms alike. Children pointed, soldiers clenched fists, and presidents did not sleep. For the United States, it was humiliation broadcast from the stars. They called it the Sputnik crisis. And for the first time, America looked small beneath the vastness of space. In Washington, meetings multiplied like shadows. Newspapers screamed of missile gaps and national embarrassment. The military demanded answers, and politicians demanded spectacles. Something, anything, to prove America still ruled the sky. And so, in hidden offices and quiet laboratories, a new idea was born, not to understand the moon, but to claim it. If the Soviets could launch a satellite, the Americans would launch something brighter, louder, unforgettable. A demonstration of strength so great that no one would dare to challenge them again. Thus began the whisper of Project A119. The plan was simple in words and terrifying in intent. A small nuclear device would be carried to the moon and detonated upon its surface. A flash of light bright enough to be seen from Earth. A cosmic exclamation mark of American power. In private memos, they called it a study of lunar research flights. But behind that polite phrase was a single purpose: to turn the moon into a stage for mankind's pride. Scientists and generals debated the possibilities. Could it be done? Would the explosion create a crater visible forever? Would the dust glow in sunlight, forming a halo around the moon like a crown or a scar? Questions of physics mixed with fantasies of glory. In Illinois, a quiet young scientist named Carl Sagan began his calculations. He was only in his 20s then, thin, sharp-eyed, and endlessly curious. He had not yet become the gentle philosopher who would later speak to the world about the pale blue dot. Back then, he was a man surrounded by formulas, tasked with predicting the brightness of a nuclear explosion on the moon. The irony was cruel. Sagan loved the stars. He wanted humanity to look upward with wonder. But the work before him turned the sky into a battlefield. Day after day, he filled pages with numbers, altitudes, detonation angles, atmospheric diffusion models. Yet somewhere in those calculations, he found a deeper equation. The balance between curiosity and conscience. He realized that if the mission failed, if the rocket carrying the bomb were to misfire, the warhead might not reach the moon at all. it could fall back toward Earth. An accident unrecorded, a silence more deadly than any explosion. Sagan's notes contained one quiet line. Some experiments need not be performed. But in those days, doubt was treason. So he said nothing. Elsewhere, in military briefings, the tone was very different. Generals spoke of a symbol, a demonstration, a message to the world. They imagined the headlines. America claims the moon. Nuclear light seen across the Earth. The idea thrilled them. A single flash that would erase the sting of Sputnik. A spectacle not of science, but of spectacle itself. The men in uniform saw victory. The scientists saw danger. And between them stood silence, thick, suffocating, patriotic silence. The moon, that ancient mirror of human longing, was about to become a weapon. The proposal that would become Project A119 did not begin in a war room, but in a quiet meeting room at the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. It was late 1958. Outside, snow fell quietly onto the streets. Inside, a dozen men gathered around a table, the light from an overhead lamp falling like a spotlight on secrecy. The folder on the table bore a modest label, a study of lunar research flights. But stamped in red across its corner were two words that changed its meaning entirely. Top secret. Among the scientists present was Carl Sagan, now a young consultant under Dr. Leonard Reifel, the project director. He had been recruited for his expertise in astrophysics and atmospheric modeling, though no one told him at first what exactly he was modeling. When he realized, his heart sank. The Air Force wanted to know what a nuclear detonation on the moon would look like from Earth. Would it be bright enough to be seen by the naked eye? Would it cast a shadow on the night sky that would remind every observer which nation had conquered space? The absurdity was breathtaking. They were planning a message to the heavens written in light and radiation. Reifel would later recall, it was never about science, it was about fear. The scientists discussed the technical details, launch vectors, impact timing, detonation, altitude. The calculations filled blackboards, their chalk dust like ghostly smoke from a bomb that had yet to explode. But between the lines, doubt began to grow. Could such an act truly be controlled? Would the detonation scatter radioactive dust into lunar orbit forever? Would fragments fall toward Earth, invisible, unstoppable? Sagan did not sleep much in those months. He kept a notebook by his bed, recording not only equations but thoughts that haunted him. He wrote about the ethical burden of knowledge, about how science without wisdom becomes its own enemy. The moon had always symbolized wonder. Now, it symbolized the madness of mankind. In Washington, however, the language was simpler. To generals and politicians, the moon was not a symbol, it was a stage. The explosion would be a demonstration of power. Proof that America could reach anywhere, strike anywhere, even beyond the atmosphere. They envisioned the flash visible across half the world, a cosmic fireworks display announcing the triumph of democracy. Behind every rationalization, pride pulsed like a heartbeat. The same heartbeat that had echoed when the first atomic bomb was tested in the deserts of New Mexico only 13 years earlier. Those who had witnessed it described a light brighter than the sun. Now, they wanted to recreate that light on the moon. Sagan found himself trapped in contradiction. He loved discovery but feared what it had become. He had joined the project to explore, not to destroy. Each day his pen scratched on paper, recording brightness ratios and detonation models. Each night, he wondered if those same numbers might one day describe humanity's first cosmic sin. And yet the project advanced. Reports were written, drafts submitted, meetings held behind closed doors. The momentum of secrecy was unstoppable. Once a dangerous idea is born inside the machinery of power, it becomes its own engine. By early 1959, the first practical tests were discussed. How to launch the device, which side of the moon to target. They decided on the visible side, so that the explosion could be seen from Earth, visible proof of dominance. But someone raised a concern. What if the flash blinds our own telescopes? Laughter followed. The absurdity was lost in irony. For a brief moment, the unthinkable seemed inevitable. The moon symbol of love, poetry, and mystery was about to be rewritten as a monument to fear. In those same weeks, a few voices began to question quietly. Dr. Rifle himself felt a weight growing heavier by the day. The responsibility of knowledge pressed upon him. He knew what the explosion would mean, not in physics, but in memory. To wound the moon was to wound the sky itself. He once told a colleague, "I keep thinking of the children who look up at it. How would they see it if we scarred it forever?" But the machine had already been built. Plans had been funded, and the silence of secrecy was thicker than courage. In a small office one evening, Rifle and Sagan shared a quiet conversation. The older man looked tired, his face half lit by a desk lamp. "We do what we're told," he said. Sagan didn't answer. He only stared at the moon through the frosted window, a pale ghost staring back. Later that night, he wrote again in his notebook. "We reach for the stars not to know them but to own them. That is the tragedy." The next morning, he tore out that page and burned it. In the months that followed, Project A119 evolved from a whisper into a doctrine. Funding appeared quietly through obscure research grants, and laboratories once devoted to peaceful astronomy now stored crates under armed guard. The military loved the idea, a weapon that could be displayed without killing anyone, a bomb whose victims were only the stars. Inside the Pentagon, models of the moon were painted with potential impact sites. Charts hung on the walls showing the trajectory of the proposed missile, looping from New Mexico through the vacuum of space, an arrow drawn straight at the heavens. Generals argued about the size of the device. 1 megaton, or perhaps 2. Someone joked that the moon would finally earn its name as the battlefield in the sky. No one laughed for long. Every calculation brought the impossible closer. Every new meeting made silence harder to break. Even those who doubted found themselves trapped by secrecy and patriotism. They had seen too much to walk away and too little to stop it. Carl Sagan kept working. He adjusted formulas, recalculated brightness curves, tried to ensure that if it did happen, it would at least be survivable, a strange form of mercy. But in quiet moments, he stared at the moon and wondered if humanity was drifting toward a place it would never return from. He thought of ancient poets who had called the moon the mirror of time, and he feared that mirror would soon reflect the ugliest truth of all. Then, one morning, a meeting changed everything. In a briefing room lined with flags, a colonel presented the newest proposal. The plan was to launch the weapon on Independence Day, 1959. He spoke the words with pride. "It will be the brightest thing mankind has ever seen." The room applauded. Sagan did not. He sat still, staring at his own hands, thinking of what that brightness would cost. That night, he went home and opened a clean page in his notebook. He wrote only one line. "When the moon becomes a weapon, we will no longer see the night." Then he closed the book. By the spring of 1959, cracks began to appear. Somewhere high above the chain of command, an unnamed official asked the question that had haunted every silent conscience in the project. What if it fails? It was the first time anyone had said it aloud. What if the rocket malfunctioned? What if the bomb exploded in orbit, scattering radioactive dust into the upper atmosphere? What if the weapon fell back to Earth? The room grew heavy with the weight of those words. No one wanted to imagine it, but once imagined, it could not be forgotten. For the first time, fear replaced ambition. Dr. Rifles submitted a report summarizing the risks. It spoke in numbers, but behind the numbers was a plea. He ended it with a single sentence that carried no calculation at all. This would be an act not of progress, but of panic. Somewhere above his head, a decision began to shift. Budgets were quietly frozen, references to Project A119 removed from memos. Within months, meetings were postponed, then canceled. And finally, without ceremony, the project was gone. But silence does not erase guilt. The men who had worked on A119 carried it in their notebooks, their dreams, their hesitation whenever they looked at the sky. Carl Sagan left for another project, one that spoke of Mars, not war. He never mentioned the moon again. In a later interview, years after his fame, someone asked him, "What was the moment you lost faith in science?" He smiled sadly. "I never lost faith in science," he said. "I lost faith in power." For decades, the story of Project A119 slept in darkness. The documents were buried in archives, sealed beneath layers of classification. The men who knew it scattered to other projects, other wars, other silences. And the moon continued to shine, untouched, unaware that it had once been targeted. Then, in 1999, a graduate student digging through old files at the University of Illinois stumbled upon a folder. Its pages were yellowed, its cover faintly stamped with a name long forgotten. A study of lunar research flights. Inside, calculations, diagrams, typed memos, and the initials CS in pencil at the corner of one page. The revelation spread quietly. Journalists confirmed its authenticity. Scientists shook their heads in disbelief. The public reaction was brief, a mix of curiosity and horror, and then the world moved on. But for those who understood what it meant, the discovery felt like opening a tomb. If the project had gone forward, the blast would have left a crater nearly a kilometer wide. The flash would have been visible from every continent, for several seconds, as bright as dawn. The moon's surface would have been scarred for millennia. Every photograph of the night sky would have carried that wound. Children would have grown up pointing at the scar and asking not, "What is that?" but "Who did that?" And perhaps someone would have answered, "We did." Humanity had flirted with self-destruction many times before the bomb, the gas, the code, but never before had it aimed its weapons at the sky itself. To attack the moon was to declare war on wonder. In those declassified pages, one note stood out. It was written in Rifle's hand. A119 was canceled before the point of no return. May it remain there. Another, unsigned, added below in pencil. The moon has forgiven us. Let's not ask why. No one knows who wrote that line. Perhaps it was Sagan. Or perhaps someone else who had stared too long at the night sky and felt its quiet judgment. The moon, of course, forgives nothing. It simply endures. Years passed. Carl Sagan became the voice of the cosmos, the man who spoke not of weapons, but of wonder. When he talked about the fragility of Earth, about the tiny blue dot adrift in darkness, he spoke with the quiet conviction of someone who had once seen what humanity almost destroyed. He never mentioned Project A119. He didn't need to. Every word he spoke about awe, about humility, was an answer to that silence. In one lecture, he said, Science is a candle in the dark, but we must remember whose hand holds the flame. The audience applauded, unaware that the candle had once been aimed at the moon. Somewhere deep inside an archive, the last surviving documents of the project rest in a metal drawer. Paper faded, ink nearly gone. But the idea they held, that terrifying spark of arrogance, still lingers like a shadow humanity refuses to face. And yet, there is hope in what did not happen. Because Project A119 was not abandoned by failure, but by choice. Someone, somewhere, said no. And in that refusal lies the quiet proof that reason can still rise above pride. Tonight, when you look up and see the moon whole, untouched, serene, remember that it could have been otherwise. It might have been scarred, broken, a warning glowing in the sky. But it is not. It remains what it has always been. A mirror, patient and unyielding. The moon watches us. It reflects not our power, but our restraint. It remembers the night we almost erased it, and forgives us with its silence. Because sometimes, the greatest light we leave behind is the one we choose not to ignite.